The morning sun crawled reluctantly over the sprawling hills of Fairhaven Cemetery, casting long shadows over rows of granite stones polished by grief and time. The grounds were quiet at this early hour, too early for mourners, too late for the ghosts of memory to stay hidden. At the far end, past the family mausoleums and marble angels frozen in eternal vigil, a black sedan rolled to a gentle stop beneath an ancient oak whose roots tangled with the past. Inside the car sat Charles Beaumont III, billionaire, tycoon, and a man who could buy just about anything except the piece of himself that lay buried 6 feet under the dew-covered grass. He was impeccably dressed, as always, a charcoal suit tailored to hide the toll that loss had taken on his once broad shoulders. His hair, once jet black, now surrendered to the silver that crept in at the temples like winter overtaking fall. He sat for a moment, staring at the fresh flowers cradled in his hand. White lilies, his son's favorite, though Charles had only learned that from a housekeeper after the boy was gone. The driver, a stoic man named Harris, opened the door, but Charles waved him off. He needed no audience for this. The weight of what he carried was his alone. Slowly, he stepped out, shoes crunching over the gravel path, eyes fixed on the headstone that never failed to mock him, Matthew Charles Beaumont. Beloved son. 1997 to 2021. He never liked how short the dash was, 2 numbers with a single line to represent a lifetime. A life stolen not by drugs or recklessness, but by a cruel twist of chance, a drunk driver on a rain-slick road, a phone call that shattered everything Charles thought he controlled. Money couldn't buy back time. Couldn't negotiate with death. Couldn't silence the guilt that hissed in the back of his mind every time he closed his eyes. Charles knelt, placing the lilies down with trembling hands. He brushed a speck of dirt from the corner of the stone, then traced the engraved letters with his thumb, as if he could feel his boy through cold granite. "I'm sorry, Matt," he whispered, voice hoarse from sleepless nights and too many drinks meant to numb the pain. "I'm sorry I wasn't," he stopped. The words were heavy, unfinished. They always were. He stayed there, lost in the silence, until a soft sound pulled him back, a muffled sob carried on the breeze. He lifted his head. Just a few feet away, half hidden by an old maple tree, knelt a woman in a plain black coat, her back turned to him. Beside her stood a small boy, no older than 5 or 6, holding her hand while looking curiously at the older man by the grave. Charles frowned. This was his son's resting place. Who else would come here, and why? The woman's shoulders shook as she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She hadn't noticed him yet, or maybe she had, but grief made strangers of us all. He stood, brushing off his knees, and cleared his throat politely. "Excuse me," he called, voice softer than the boardroom bark that made CEOs tremble. The woman startled, twisting to face him. Their eyes locked. She was young, mid-20s maybe. Her skin was the color of warm mahogany, her hair pulled into a messy bun like she hadn't planned to see anyone today. Her eyes, deep brown, wide with shock, flashed with something more than just sadness. There was fear there too. And shame. She clutched the child closer. "I'm sorry, sir," she stammered, her voice delicate but steady. We didn't mean to intrude." Charles tilted his head, studying her. "You're not intruding. But, do you know my son?" His words felt clumsy, alien on his tongue. The woman swallowed hard, eyes darting to the child and back. The boy stared up at Charles, his small hand still wrapped around the woman's fingers. There was something unsettling in that stare, something familiar that made Charles's heart skip a beat. I should go," she whispered, tugging at the boy's hand. But he didn't move. He kept staring at Charles with wide, curious eyes that made the billionaire's chest tighten. "What's your name?" Charles asked, more sharply than he meant to. The woman flinched. "Naomi," she murmured, her voice so soft he barely caught it. "My name is Naomi. This is Aaron." Charles knelt to the boy's level, ignoring the protest in his aging knees. "Hello, Aaron," he said, his voice gentler now. The boy didn't answer. He just looked at him, through him, with eyes that echoed a ghost Charles knew all too well. The silence stretched. Naomi tugged again, this time more urgently. "We should really go, Mr. Beaumont," Charles said, standing abruptly. "Charles Beaumont. That's my son's grave." Naomi nodded, eyes darting down. "I know," she whispered. Her grip on Aaron's hand tightened. She turned to leave, but Charles stepped closer, blocking her path. "Wait," he said, a hint of the billionaire's command returning. "How do you know Matthew? Please, tell me." Naomi looked up at him then, and for a moment, Charles saw everything he had missed: fear, sorrow, secrets heavy enough to drag a woman to her knees in a graveyard at dawn. "It's complicated," she breathed. Her eyes glistened, but she refused to let the tears fall. "Please, Mr. Beaumont, just let us go." Charles opened his mouth to protest, but the boy, Aaron, did something unexpected. He stepped forward, tugging free of Naomi's grasp. Slowly, he reached out and touched Charles's hand, tiny fingers brushing over the billionaire's wedding band. "Are you, my grandpa?" the boy asked softly, his words so clear they split the early morning silence like a church bell. Naomi gasped. Charles froze. His world, already cracked at the edges, fractured all over again. His mouth went dry. He looked at Naomi for answers, but she looked away, ashamed and defeated. "What did he just say?" Charles demanded, his voice cracking with something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Fear. A desperate, reckless yearning. Naomi closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. She knelt beside her son, wrapping him in her arms as if to shield him from the storm that was about to break. "Mr. Beaumont. Charles. I didn't want you to find out like this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But Aaron, he's Matthew's son. Your grandson." The word struck Charles like a slap, a blow he'd never seen coming. He staggered back, eyes locked on the boy's face, searching for proof. The shape of his nose. The curve of his chin. The eyes, Matthew's eyes, staring back at him through a child who shouldn't exist, who did exist. For the first time in decades, Charles Beaumont III, master of empires, king of boardrooms, felt utterly powerless. And deep in the hollow of his chest, something that had been dead for 4 years flickered back to life. For what felt like forever, no one spoke. The wind whispered through the cemetery, rustling the leaves above as if the trees themselves were gossiping about secrets buried deeper than any coffin. Charles stared at the boy, his grandson. The thought echoed so loudly in his mind he wondered if Naomi could hear it too. Naomi rose slowly, keeping her hand on Aaron's shoulder. She looked at Charles, eyes pleading for understanding that she knew she wouldn't get. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. Why didn't I know?" Charles rasped, his voice brittle with disbelief. "Why didn't Matthew, why didn't you, tell me?" Naomi's chin trembled. She wanted to stand tall, but shame tugged at her posture, bowing her under a weight she'd carried alone for years. "Because he didn't know either, Mr. Beaumont. Matthew never knew. I found out after the accident." Charles felt the air slip from his lungs. He staggered backward, grabbing the cold edge of the headstone for balance. His fingers traced the engraved name again, as if begging the stone to answer questions that would never be spoken aloud. His son had died never knowing he had a child. Charles had buried a son and unknowingly buried the chance to see his family live on. The irony was a blade, twisting in his gut. He looked at Naomi, his eyes narrowing with suspicion that slipped easily over the cracks in his grief. "So what now? You show up here, you let him," he gestured at the boy, whose small face was creased with worry. "You let him say that to me in a graveyard? Why now? Why here? Naomi's eyes flashed, a glimpse of the fire she'd needed to survive these last 6 years. "I didn't plan this," she snapped, voice sharp but breaking at the edges. "I come here sometimes because she glanced at Aaron, her voice softening. "Because he wants to know where his daddy is. I didn't know you'd be here this morning." Charles wanted to argue, to demand explanations that made sense. But he couldn't find the words. He looked down at Aaron, whose small hand clutched Naomi's coat. The boy looked so much like Matthew at that age it was almost unbearable. "Where do you live?" Charles asked suddenly, the businessman in him taking control when the father, the grandfather, couldn't. Naomi hesitated. "Edgewater," she said finally, so quietly he had to lean in to catch it. "I work at the diner on 4th Street. Double shifts most days." Edgewater. The neighborhood might as well have been a different world. Charles had driven through it once, when his driver took a wrong turn downtown. Run-down apartments, cracked sidewalks, too many children playing barefoot in yards guarded by chain-link fences and barking dogs. The idea of his grandson growing up there, Charles's chest tightened with an unfamiliar ache. "This isn't what Matthew would have wanted," a voice whispered in his head. "Why didn't you come to me?" he asked, softer now, almost pleading. "I would have." Naomi cut him off with a bitter laugh that died before it fully formed. "You would have what?" "Believe me. A black waitress from Edgewater, showing up at your mansion claiming she's carrying your son's baby? You would have called your lawyers. Had me buried in paperwork, dragged through court, forced me to prove every heartbeat inside me belonged to Matthew. I didn't want that for him." She gestured at Aaron again. "I didn't want him to feel like a mistake." The words were a punch. Charles flinched. Because she was right, he would have done that. He would have protected his name, his fortune, his reputation. He would have thrown up walls to keep her out and buried the truth under hush money and legal threats. He hated himself for it, but he couldn't deny it. Aaron shifted closer to Naomi's leg, peeking at Charles with wide, uncertain eyes. He didn't understand all these words, but he felt the tension in the air like static before a storm. "How old is he?" Charles asked, his voice trembling as he forced himself to keep looking at the boy, at his own blood standing there in the morning chill. 5, Naomi said. He turned 6 in December. 5. The same age Matthew had been when Charles taught him how to ride a bike on the driveway of the old estate in Westchester. He remembered the scraped knees, the tears, the pride on Matthew's face when he finally let go of the seat and watched him wobble away under his own power. He wondered who taught Aaron to ride. If he even had a bike. Charles's throat tightened. What does he know? About us? Naomi exhaled shakily. He knows his daddy loved him, even if he never got to meet him. He knows he has a grandpa. He asked once why you never came to see him. I told him you were busy. That maybe one day you'd want to meet him. Charles closed his eyes. The weight of that maybe landed heavy on his chest. How many birthdays had he missed? How many nights had Naomi sat alone, watching the boy sleep, wondering if she'd made the right choice keeping him hidden from the man who could have changed their lives with a single phone call? Do you need money? He asked abruptly, the old reflex kicking in, throw money at a problem, patch it with checks and signatures. He hated how pathetic it sounded in the hush of the cemetery. Naomi's jaw tightened. It's not about money. It was never about money. Aaron tugged at Naomi's coat again, his small voice cutting through the heaviness. Mama, can we go home? Naomi nodded, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. Yes, baby. We're going. Charles watched her turn to leave, watched the life he'd never known existed about to disappear back into a world he couldn't control. Panic surged in his veins, sharp and cold. He reached out, his hand hovering above Naomi's shoulder. Wait, he pleaded, the word rough and unfamiliar on his tongue. Charles Beaumont does not beg, the voice in his head sneered. But he did now. Naomi turned, her eyes tired and guarded. "Please," Charles said softly. "Let me see him again. Let me know him. Let me make this right." Naomi searched his face, reading the desperation he was too proud to hide. She wanted to say no, she should say no. But Aaron looked up at her, his small hand slipping into hers, his eyes flicking back to the man who was so much more than a stranger. A question in that gaze she couldn't ignore. "All right," she said finally, her voice fragile but resolute. "One visit. One. And then we'll see." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't redemption. But it was something. A crack in the walls he'd built around his cold, gilded life. Charles looked at Aaron, really looked at him. For the first time in years, he felt hope flicker in the ruin of his chest. Maybe Matthew wasn't gone. Not completely. Maybe, just maybe, he could do something right before it was too late. Charles sat in the back of his sedan, watching through tinted glass as Naomi buckled Aaron into an aging, dented sedan parked under the sagging branches at the edge of the cemetery lot. Harris, his driver, sat in the front, politely silent, but Charles could feel the questions simmering in the air between them. He didn't care. For once, the billionaire who always seemed to know exactly what to say had no words, only a jumble of disbelief, guilt, and a spark of something dangerously close to hope. Naomi's car pulled away first. Charles told Harris to follow, at a distance. He needed to see where they lived. Needed to know. For 5 years, this boy, his grandson, had existed in the shadows of his empire. A life he hadn't known about. A life he hadn't protected. The drive to Edgewater only took 20 minutes but felt like crossing decades. The world changed block by block. The smooth, tree-lined boulevards near Charles's penthouse gave way to cracked asphalt, faded store signs, and weather-beaten apartment blocks guarded by rusted gates. Here, no one cared that he was Charles Beaumont III. Money felt foreign here, irrelevant. Or maybe it was exactly what everyone dreamed of in this neighborhood but never had enough of. Harris parked across the street when Naomi's car pulled up in front of a tired-looking brick building with peeling paint and a broken porch light. Charles watched as Naomi carried Aaron up the narrow steps to the second floor. She moved with the weariness of someone used to carrying burdens alone. "Wait here," Charles murmured to Harris. Before the driver could protest, Charles was out of the car. He felt the stares from the neighbors, old men smoking on stoops, a young woman pushing a stroller, 2 kids playing basketball with a half-flat ball on the cracked sidewalk. Charles straightened his suit jacket, feeling foolishly out of place. For once, the tailored fabric did nothing to shield him. At the top of the steps, Naomi stood in the open doorway, blocking the entrance with her body like a guard dog protecting her den. "I told you one visit," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel. Charles raised both hands, palms open. "I'm not here to take him," he said, surprised by how much he meant it. I want to see where he lives. May I?" Naomi hesitated, her eyes darting to Aaron, who peeked around her legs with wide, curious eyes. After a heartbeat that stretched like a held breath, she stepped aside. Inside, the apartment was small but clean. A faded sofa, toys lined up neatly in a battered plastic bin. Crayons scattered on a coffee table scarred by countless scribbles. The smell of something warm, maybe cinnamon, maybe just the ghost of breakfast, clung to the air. Charles looked around, absorbing every detail. The place was humble. Humble in a way he hadn't known since his own father scraped his way out of a mining town in West Virginia. It humbled him too, to see his blood here, living this way while he signed deals worth more than this whole block every day. Aaron clutched a small, battered stuffed lion to his chest as he studied Charles from across the living room. The boy's eyes were the same shade of hazel as Matthew's, but his curls and warm brown skin were Naomi's alone. He was beautiful. He was real. Charles lowered himself carefully onto the edge of the sofa, ignoring the groan of old springs under his weight. He didn't know what to say to a 5-year-old boy who carried the last piece of his son inside him. "Hi, Aaron," he said softly. "Do you like lions?" Aaron nodded solemnly, hugging the toy tighter. "His name's Leo," the boy said shyly, his voice small but clear. Charles smiled, the gesture unfamiliar on a face used to tight-lipped boardroom smirks. "Leo's a good name. Did your daddy give him to you?" Naomi's breath hitched behind them. She sat in a threadbare armchair, arms wrapped around herself. "No," she said quietly. "I bought him for Aaron when he turned 1. He takes Leo everywhere." Silence settled between them. Charles wanted to say something, anything, but everything that came to mind felt hollow. So he just looked at the boy, memorizing every freckle, every curl, every piece of Matthew that lived on in him. Finally, Aaron shuffled closer, curiosity winning over shyness. He climbed onto the couch beside Charles, Leo clutched tight in one hand. "Do you have toys?" the boy asked, peering up at him with the kind of innocent boldness only children possess. Charles's throat tightened. "I used to buy lots of toys for your daddy when he was your age," he said, voice rough with memory. Maybe I can get you some too. If that's all right." Aaron grinned, a wide, gap-toothed smile that knocked the air out of Charles's lungs. It was like seeing Matthew again, alive and untouched by tragedy. For a moment, he felt the weight in his chest ease, just a little. Naomi watched them, torn between protectiveness and the faintest flicker of something else, something that looked dangerously like hope. She'd promised herself she'd keep Aaron safe from this world of billionaires and secrets and broken promises. But watching them together, she wondered if she'd been trying to protect herself too. Charles cleared his throat, forcing himself back to the present. "Naomi," he said, turning to her, careful not to spook the fragile trust between them. "I want to help. Not just with money. With everything. School. A better place to live. Anything you both need." Naomi's eyes hardened. "I don't want your charity." "It's not charity," Charles said quickly. "It's family." She flinched at the word. Family had never been simple for either of them. He pressed on. "Please. Let me do something right. For him. For Matthew."